Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today is a really special video because my friend Esabelle, I mean Esabelle, goodness knows she's not trying to copy Animal Crossing, made a video taking the Myers-Briggs test, but from my perspective. And sure enough, she got ISTJ, which is my personality type as well, take it or leave it. And she wanted us to do a part 2 to that collaboration where we react to each other's answers and see how accurately we know each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have clips of her video every now and then I will report on where primarily it'll be going deeper into an answer that she gave. Like, she might just barely scratch the surface, but she'll say something like, well, I've never met him, but here's what I think based on what I know. And I'll be like, well, let me fill in the blanks for you. Or if it's something where it's based on something internal, and of course, obviously, she can't know that, and probably never will, because introverts do most of their talking in their heads. So without further ado, let's see how well she did.
You feel involved when watching TV soaps. Does it have to be a soap specifically? Does that matter to the question? And also define feel involved. He certainly gets involved in the media that he is into. They're not soaps. How literally do I have to take the wording here? Okay, we're just going to look at TV soaps as like media in general. That's just how I'm going to interpret this.
I suppose you could say that's a pretty fair answer, because I don't really watch TV soap operas. I mean, I hardly watch TV at all. But I would say the closest thing I can think of to a true soap opera would be Once Upon a Time, which people have described as just a glorified soap opera because you've got so many people falling in love with another and jealousy even if there is no love triangle. But whether I'm involved or not is a more involved question, because I definitely get very into the stuff that I'm into, and I certainly have had my share of Once Upon a Time references on this channel and have talked about Rumpelstiltskin so much that my sister groans if she even hears the word Rumpelstiltskin. But I would say that being involved kind of means that you're like sympathetic with the characters, and to a certain extent I am, but usually only if I can actually relate to what the characters are going through. So I probably won't sympathize with characters like Belle a whole lot because she's just absolutely ridiculous. But someone like Rumpelstiltskin and Emma Swan, absolutely. And I'll use them in a lot of my understanding how I think videos, which is why a lot of my thumbnails have either Emma or Rumpelstiltskin, because they just relate so much to what I've been through.
It is difficult to get you excited. He's told me he tends to be more excited on the inside than what he shows on the outside. As far as looking excited, I would say definitely yes. As far as getting excited in truth, that's a little bit of a different matter. I would still say it's a little bit harder than not. I'm gonna put a soft yes. He does get more excited than what he lets on. He's not one of those people who's like, yay, about everything.
She pretty much nailed it with her explanation, but again, that element of what's going on inside is the part that obviously she cannot know. So for me, it's actually very easy for me to get excited. But the question specifically doesn't mention how I show the excitement or if I have excitement plastered all over my face. Because when Banjo was announced for Smash, oh my gosh, was I excited. And I ran through the whole house screaming in joy, which doesn't really happen a whole lot. That's one of the first times ever that I've shown that much outward excitement for a piece of media. But I would say that I do get excited a lot. Most of it is on the inside. And a lot of times, if I'm excited for someone else, it'll be much more subdued just because it's harder for me to tell what other people are feeling. Like if my friend announces, hey, I got a new job, I'll be like, oh, that's nice. on Facebook, and I'll have a very subdued excitement, but at the same time I'll be happy for them. So I would say she mostly got it right. I just wanted to elaborate further on what was going on the inside.
You often think about mankind and its destiny.
The reason why I paused after that clip as opposed to allowing her to finish her thoughts on the question is because her thoughts were essentially right. Like, I don't really think about humanity and its destiny and where we're going, because it's like, I already know the answer. The second coming's going to come. Why do I need to think about it? It's going to happen. But the reason I paused it is because the test says humankind, and she said mankind. So I guess it's kind of amusing that there are people out there that don't try to be politically correct, and she's just like, I'm going to say mankind, even though there's also women, so I'm not going to say womankind and mankind, which is probably why the humankind existed in the first place. So it shows that she has some nice traditional values, which is very interesting coming from an INFJ's perspective, because they usually like to innovate. So yay for traditions. Do I really come across as that rational of a person? I always thought that if you're going to go with the whole logical over emotions, that I would say I'm a lot more practical. And it's definitely possible to be practical and logical, but it's also possible to be practical and emotional, like the ISFJs of the world. They are very practical, but they also go with their feelings. So I found it interesting that she put a hard no, because I would say that I actually act with emotions a lot more than people would think. The fact that I'm going to the swimming pool at all is highly emotional. But I would say that I generally don't act emotional if there's a logical alternative. Like, if there's a situation where there pretty much is no logical answer, obviously the only thing left to do is to act based on feelings. But I would say that generally speaking, if I'm presented the choice between what is reasonable versus what is emotional, I'm generally going to go with what is reasonable. So I would prefer a soft no, but hey, she got ISTJ's test results, so I guess the test was a bit lenient here.
You frequently and easily express your emotions and feelings.
I would definitely agree that she got the right answer on the test, but she also really skimmed the surface on that. Maybe it's because she didn't want the video to go on forever. Maybe in the unedited version she does talk it out and stuff like that. So I thought, you know what? If she's going to go that quickly, I'll elaborate. So the key word here is frequently and easily. If you're wondering why I always look to the right, it's because I have notes here. What do you know? I actually wrote somewhat of a script. I would say that when it comes to surface level emotions like basic irritation or simple excitement, I'm pretty sure every person in the universe is like that. Like, even the inferior feelers that I've seen will have little outbursts of emotion. Like, if an ESTJ comes into a messy workplace, they'll say, "What the heck is this?" So that's very much an emotion right there. But when it comes to the deeper emotions, like what am I really feeling about something, that is where I would say that it's a lot harder, just because I would say that emotions are a very abstract thing, and it's really hard for me to fathom stuff that is abstract and non-literal. So if I can find a way to put my emotions into a more literal way of speaking, like if I can compare it to something that's real or a once upon a time clip, then I would say in that case, yes. But usually I have a lot of time wording those emotions, or I would prefer to think it out for many, many years before I finally put it on YouTube. So you could say that if you're watching videos where I am easily expressing my emotions, it's because I've been thinking about them for almost my whole life.
You get bored if you have to read. Serenity. You get bored if you have to read theoretical books. Is there an answer with several exclamation points after the yes? Because if so, that would be the answer. Yes.
I think that was the part of the video that I laughed the most and literally had to like turn away from it for a bit so that I could properly laugh because I liked how she overemphasized the fact that probably of all the questions on the test, this one fits me the most because I do hate theoretical books. I don't really read much to begin with. We'll definitely get to that later, but I would say that reading pretty much anything is a chore, but especially books that talk about possibilities and like the what ifs in life. I mean, I even kind of get a headache speculating about upcoming games and Smash Fighters. Like when people say, "Hey, Paul, I strongly believe that this character has a good chance of being in Smash." Sure, I'll listen just because I like the passion that the person has for Smash, but the speculation itself, I'll just tolerate it because I'd prefer not to think too hard about the future and just kind of let it come and be surprised whenever the next reveal comes. So I'm definitely glad that she seems to really get that philosophy and abstract thinking and theories. Not really my thing.
You rapidly get involved in the social life of a new workplace. He has told me how he hates having to acclimate to change. New workplace, that's a lot of change.
This one was also pretty funny because now I don't know if this is just her sense of humor or she realizes that I'm watching it and I have a very literal brain where even if I don't necessarily express it, usually the first thing that comes into my mind is going to be the most literal thing. I'm not really going to see things in an abstract manner. I may learn to talk more like that, like I've learned by now that don't cry over spilled milk does not necessarily mean milk was spilled. Although I do still have a hard time understanding grass is greener on the other side. That one someone will have to explain to me. But the fact that she put literal pennies falling from the sky because saying afraid of change, it's like, yeah, that's pretty indicative of my sense of humor that I would think that change is a type of money. Not necessarily the first thing that would have popped into my head in that particular instance, but I'd probably make a joke about that somewhere along the line.
You easily empathize with the concerns of other people. I don't know about easily. I think he's had to learn that. Very, very light. Yes. I could be totally wrong about that though.
Boy, am I glad that she put that editing Esabelle part in there because I definitely would not have put a yes. I would definitely have put a no. So the interesting thing here is I think this is just the fact that she's a feeling type, and pretty much every feeling type makes this mistake. But I would say that most people don't know the difference between empathy and sympathy. They're very different things, at least in a thinking type's mind. So allow me to elaborate. So sympathy is more about where you understand the general principle about why a person is upset or feeling pretty much anything, but you generally use sympathize in a negative connotation. You don't say, I sympathize you for being happy for getting a new job. The wording you would use there is share in their excitement. So sympathy I'm definitely capable of, especially if I've done it before. Like if someone says, "Hey, I lost my grandma," I'll be like, "I lost my grandma too. I totally get what you're feeling." However, empathy is a whole different ball game. And the thing about empathy is that a lot of people think that every feeling type by default is going to be empathetic, but even extroverted feelers aren't necessarily empaths. That's kind of more of a rare ability where you literally suck in someone's pain and like you feel the pain that they're feeling. And that is something that, generally speaking, unless like there's a really powerful moment at the conference where the Eucharist is in play, I'm generally terrible at that. I'm that type of person where I'll be watching an ad where someone is saying like, "Oh my gosh." Actually, I'll give you an example. The other day, I saw an ad for the COVID vaccine, and the woman was kind of sort of sobbing and saying, "I got the vaccine because my friend didn't, and she died of COVID." And I'm just like, I mean, the person's dead, so what can you do about it? Now, that sounds really cruel, But it's because empathy is just not really something I get. I can't really feel other people's pain. I can definitely sympathize if I can relate to it, but literally feeling it and vacuuming it in, I'll leave that to the extroverted feelers to handle.
Often you prefer to read a book than go to a party. In general, I would say yes. Kind of the alone time is more his thing. I know he likes to hang out with friends. It's just that a party...
This is a bit of a loophole question because the test is worded so that it's very black and white thinking. Like, I assume an ESTJ was the one that wrote this because it doesn't really leave room for alternatives. It says book or party, not really giving you a middle ground. Like, what if I don't like reading? I honestly don't really read that much anymore. I don't even really reread Harry Potter all that much, which is saying something because I have read Harry Potter books more than I can count. I would say I would prefer playing video games over going to a party, but if I had to pick between a book and a party, I think I would choose the party, honestly, because reading books, a lot of times it's really tiring because most books are written with the perspective of trying to analyze the deeper meaning behind, like, what is the symbolism of the book, what is the authorial intent, are there hidden messages in the book. I don't really like that. I also don't really like how books tend to copy each other's ideas as opposed to trying to be all new and coming up with original ideas. Parties, on the other hand, again, that is a bit much. I generally don't like being in groups of more than 2 or 3, but if it's the right kind of party where there's options to get off to the side and sort of like take what I want and not like have to be directly in the thick of things, then yes, I wouldn't mind going to a party. And if there's someone that I haven't seen in eons, like if any of my mission trip friends are there, I'm going to want to go by default, even if it's like 1,000 people. I'm going to say, mission trip buddies, I'm going. Not that that opportunity has presented itself very much, but that's an aspect where you're putting an element of my past into a way to relive it. And in that case, I would say that generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, if something reminds me of something that I love, I'll go for it. And if something reminds me of something that I hate, I won't go for it.
For you, it is easier to gain knowledge through hands-on experience than from books or manuals. He goes off of experiences, and that seems to be where he draws a lot of his knowledge. And a lot of his experiences are hands-on. He doesn't usually reference books or manuals whenever he's talking about something that he's learned. He goes to what he's experienced in the past.
She got this one mostly right, because it is true that I do rely on my experience more than I rely on a future possibility. However, there's one thing that she forgot to take into account, or I wouldn't say forget is the right word, more of there's no way she could have known because it didn't cross my mind that this was something I needed to tell her when I talked about mission trips, but she keeps bringing up how, like, he learned this experience through the past and the mission trip taught him this, but it's like, how did I learn while I was on the mission trip is the key word that I think she didn't know. And I very much had to use a manual when I was on the mission trip for the first time. Like, the staff printed out these paper copies of, like, these are the rules of the camp and this is how you will act and behave. And, like, you know, considering the fact that the mission trips are primarily high schoolers, obviously I also had to read through the do's and don'ts of how to handle yourself around minors so I wouldn't create a scandal. So I would say that while I was on these trips that became a past experience, while they were happening in the present, that was very much I needed to know the rules so that I'd know how to behave so that I wouldn't end up creating well, I already used the word scandal, so I guess you could say creating a controversy. I wanted to make sure that I was, upright and just and following the rules. So I would say that now, obviously, I can look back on the mission trip, but while I was actually going through it, I definitely needed someone to walk me through the steps. When I'm learning a new job, I definitely need every single step to be explained in depth. If I were to go into a new situation and try to, futz my way through it, like my friend Mike, where he's just like on the keyboard. Oh, I figured it out. I can't really do that. If I can, it's usually because no one's around to teach me, and then it takes me like 3 hours to figure it out. So I would say experience, yes, I do heavily rely on it, but in the moment, hands-on is definitely not my way to do it.
You feel at ease in a crowd. He seems like he's had enough experience being around people in mission trips. I would say light yes.
Okay, here's the kicker here. So, the thing about Myers-Briggs tests is that when they're asking the questions, they don't expect that in every single circumstance you're going to answer the same. Obviously, there are unknown variables that happen to each and every person, and every now and then they're probably going to end up doing something that they would say yes to. Like, I'm sure ISTJs are capable of reading theoretical books, and there could be one out there that works for them. But they're asking on the general principle. So, the general question of, do I feel at ease in a crowd? That would definitely be a big no. I generally don't like being around a lot of people, especially if I'm not talking to them and like actively creating connections. Like if I were doing my live streams and 10 people showed up, but only one person was actively talking to me, that wouldn't make me feel happy because I would feel like, oh, those other 9 people are kind of just there in the background, and I wouldn't like that. Mission trips, again, the thing about this is that mission trips are only once a year, and if I do anything else, like a conference or a retreat that I'm chaperoning, those are also only once a year, and that's usually the only other thing I'll do. So by that logic, twice a year equals only a very small percentage of my actual life. So that would be more of an exception than the norm. But even so, one thing that I think that she's forgetting about is that during those moments on the mission trip and the conference where I was in a crowd, those were the parts that I disliked the most. But the parts that I usually revel in and talk about and share the stories are the ones where I'm in a very small and intimate, not that kind of intimate, gathering, and I'm really establishing a deep conversation where I'm really getting to like help a person through their struggles, or like have a very small team of workmates where we're working on a project as a very small group. And in that respect, that's where I get the most enjoyment, during stuff like the dance parties and the singing on the mission trip. I guess you could say I kind of enjoy it. Like, I realize that it's only once a year and it's only for like a couple of hours in the day, and I can like go and take a nap later. I think I'd be okay the fact that they have a deadline on the mission trip and they say like, okay, 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, party, 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, rest. Then I'll be like, okay, that's cool. So I would say that generally speaking, I hate crowds, but mission trip is kind of the exception. But even then, if I'm just with people for the sake of being with people, I'm not going to be happy. But if I'm, say, surrounded by 10 people who are all intently listening on what I have to say about overcoming depression, and then all 10 of these people say, Paul, I'm not going to commit suicide, then in that case I would enjoy it.
You usually place yourself near to the side of the room than the center of the room. I wish I knew him in person for this. I'm gonna go light yes. Just captures him more.
So technically she got it right here, but she also said, I wish I knew him in person. So, I'll explain it to you. I would say, generally speaking, I prefer to be in the part of the room where there's the most literal space. Like, I like to be able to stretch out my arms and not feel like if I do stretch out my arms, I'm going to hit someone. Like, I used to have really bad claustrophobia, and to a certain extent, I still do. Like, it's my natural reaction when someone is close to me to, like, make the gesture of after you and like get out of the way of people. Like sometimes I don't even like sitting next to people, and like I'll scoot away when I'm on the couch with people. There's exceptions, obviously. Like if I'm really close to someone, I'll be more okay with it than not. But I would say that generally speaking, if I was on the side of the room, that is a better opportunity for the more empathetic, outgoing people to say, hey, it looks like you need someone to talk to. So then it's not as hard to approach someone, because if you were to watch my male struggles video, you'd know that one thing I hate is people perceiving me as a criminal or a pedophile or a pervert. And in today's society, you can say pretty much anything and people will misconstrue it as inappropriate. So usually I like to let the females make the first move, because since when do people say that females are perverts for talking to males? That's maybe a bit sexist on my part, but I would say that whatever part of the room makes it so that I'm not the one doing most of the initiating, so that I don't have to worry about being in trouble, that's where I would place myself.
You find it difficult to talk about your feelings. See, I think he does a fair job.
But then
I'm going to take his word for it that he's holding back a lot of his emotions. I think he does it better than he gives himself credit for, but this is from his perspective. So I think he'd probably say yes.
One of my favorite catchphrases that I hear from INFJs in particular is, I think you're better than you give yourself credit for. And to a certain extent, I can see ENFJs doing that too. But the key word there is easily, and the other key word there is perception. So obviously, when a person is actually doing something, the only thing the other person can see is the outward actions. And even if the person is describing an internal process, they're not going to actually see what's going on inside the brain. It's not like they have X-ray vision. They're going to see the results of the brain working. So, for example, you can see me talking right now. You have that visual and you can hear my voice, but you're not seeing what part of the brain is governing how I'm doing the speech. So, yes, it is true that I'm a lot better than most ISTJs at expressing my feelings, and I definitely am capable of giving a nice, heartfelt, like, here's what's actually going on if I trust someone. But just because it looks like it's easy for me doesn't mean that it is. It could be that I've just learned how to do it better, but still the inward part of the brain is like, okay, I gotta figure out the best way of wording this. And that's often a very arduous process, and more often than not, I really have to think hard about every single word that I'm saying in a social situation. That's why I can appear so outgoing and boisterous in these videos, and sometimes when I'm around people I'm comfortable with, yes, but generally speaking, I'm always panicking about saying the wrong thing or being perceived wrong. So I would say that I've gotten to the point where it looks easy for me to express my emotions, but that doesn't make it actually easy.
You are easily affected by strong emotions. He seems pretty able to stay distant and therefore more objective and rational.
This is another case where we're talking about perception versus reality. So obviously, my outward way of reacting to an emotion is going to be very distant and rational, because the thinking for the ISTJ is extroverted. So that means obviously what I think and what's objective and realistic is going to be very easily expressed. But then there's that annoying introverted feeling, which is tertiary and drives me absolutely insane, because it means that we ISTJs are actually a lot more in touch with our emotions and our values than you would think. We just tend to place a lot more emphasis on either saving it for the opportune time, kind of like how a person would budget their money, and they wouldn't just like say they get $20 from their birthday and just be like, I'm gonna go spend it. We would, invest in it and try to see like, okay, maybe I'll save it for a better time. So I would say that I can be affected by strong emotions, but usually it's only if I really trust the person or if I can relate to them. Like if to sort of put it lightly, there was a girl on the mission trip that I met, and she was talking about how there was the possibility that because she had a health condition and she could have dropped dead on that mission trip. And that actually caused me to tear up, But now that I think about it in retrospect, I think it was the fact that she was going to die as opposed to that she was sad about dying that was making me cry, because I was going through really deep depression, and that particular mission trip was so terrible that I kind of, at the time, I kind of wanted to just die and not get to the end of the mission trip myself. So I guess you could say I was relating to myself in that moment. So I was more thinking about my own emotions than hers. There are definitely times where I can seem very rude and aloof to what other people are feeling. And there are times, even in recent memories, where my family will say, like, oh my gosh, that's so rude or that's so insensitive. But it's just because understanding other people's emotions is a very abstract thing, and their brain is wired differently than me, and I can't read minds, so it's very hard to comprehend how their specific brains are handling emotions. But I would say that I do um, experience very strong bursts of my own subjective emotions. It's just not always going to show outwardly.
It is easy for you to communicate in social situations. I would say yes. Even before we really knew each other all that well, he was pretty good at communicating with me. He would probably say he has room for improvement, but he'd probably say yes.
Yep. There's another example of perception versus what's actually going on in the brain. Because I would definitely say that by introvert standards, it is relatively easy for me to communicate because I have experience with public speaking. So obviously, you have to know how to present your thoughts to people, and you have to know how to have the right voice inflection and the right body language. So I would say most ISTJs tend to talk very stiff, kind of like how they do in anime, where when they're talking, only the mouth is animated. But I've learned that that's not really effective at getting my points across. So I've sort of made an effort to get past that natural tendency to just stand like a butler. I can definitely do that when I'm not trying to present an idea. Like if I show up for work training, I'll usually put my hands behind my back and won't really show a lot of body movements at all. But if I'm comfortable with someone, I can be very animated. But the key word is easy to communicate, and it is never easy. Even when I'm around my best friends, I am always struggling to figure out the right words to say and how to effectively communicate. And I would say that even the way that I say hello to people, I'm very carefully trying to measure it out. And when I am told, like, hey, Paul, let's hang out today or let's be on the phone, I'm always thinking in advance of, like, okay, here's what to do, here's what not to do, and then trying to keep track of every single person's preferences. Oh my gosh, that's exhausting. There are times where I just don't really care, and I say, like, you know what? I'm not going to try super hard to accommodate to people's feelings because that's just too draining, and it's too hard to try to be politically correct and try to accommodate everyone. But I would definitely say that when it comes to someone that I trust and someone that I really value, I will try a lot harder to respect their boundaries and not cross a line. I don't really like crossing boundaries in general, but if the person's like the oversensitive type that says saying the word is a mortal sin, then I'll just be like, grow up. In closing, I'm actually really amazed at how well she gets me. It may seem like she got so much wrong by the number of clips that I've shown you guys, but if you were to watch the entire video, which is 19 minutes long, it's really amazing how we actually share no functions in common, because she's an INFJ, I'm an ISTJ. We're actually considered each other's enigma types. But yet, despite all that, it seems like she's really paid attention to everything that I've told her. And she knows me so well, and we haven't even met in person. We've never video chatted. We've talked on the phone, but again, for an INFJ that prefers to analyze, it's really interesting how much she knows about me without that visual aid to be able to observe my facial expressions or my body movements. So overall, I would say that by INFJ standards, taking that test for me is probably the best results I've ever received in my life. And I would think that a lot of my good friends who watched this video would get a good chuckle out of just about everything she said, because they'd say, oh my gosh, that is so Paul. How did she come to that conclusion after knowing him for less than a year, when some of us only came to that conclusion after knowing him for more like 10 years? So I guess the moral of the story, guys, is never underestimate dominant introverted intuition. So overall, I give this video an A+. And I highly recommend that you guys check it out. If for some reason you can't find it by yourselves, or you're the forgetful types, I'll leave it in the description. But just make sure you leave a comment on how I did. Maybe check out Esabelle's channel in the meantime. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and she gets me, guys. Take some lessons from her. Bye.